Good afternoon and welcome back to House Transportation. We're going to have a little bit of a committee discussion piece as well as being joined by Logan Newberry from the JFO. And we're going to go into a couple of questions, open piece, and then also to go back to the BAA letter if there is any discussion or changes around that so that we can make sure to get it out of here and back our response back over to appropriations. Has to be there tomorrow at the latest. So with that, if there's an issue to bring up of anything that came up.
Yeah, just a quick question. Our previous testimony, or not JFO, our CEO for transportation indicated that there was reimbursement to their personnel that dealt with the flooding disaster that Vermont experienced, and it was like a tune of roughly $6.2 million that was reimbursed to us. So, and she indicated that 6.2 was sort of embedded in the budget adjustment. And I guess my question is why didn't we see that, and where did the governor recommend that money be spent?
Sure. So for the record, Logan Newberry with the Joint Fiscal Office. So the money she is referring to, I believe, and she probably went into more detail, and I'll be able to, is from FHWA that was received due to the flooding, is sort of a reimbursement that they could use on, I believe it's sort of like administrative or personnel cost stuff. So my understanding of this is sort of been in the works for a while now, and they've been in discussion with FHWA to sort of determine the exact amount of money that they were going to get. I think they're almost determined now. They had originally, when we presented the budget, I guess last year now, had in there about $8.5 million that they were expecting to receive back. Since then, since working with the federal agency, they are now assuming it's going to be closer to 6.2, as she mentioned there. So that money you'll see, I can pull up an operation statement, is sort of included in the sort of calculus to determine to balance the budget essentially. It has since been reduced down about whatever it is, $2 million. And so some of the sort of excess that we saw revenues at the end of FY24 will be shifted forward to help meet the balance, the sort of offset that decrease in the administrative money that we were expecting to get back and no longer. So it is, and I can maybe pull up a operating statement, and that will be a little easier to show you. Let me see if I can.
That's fine, but usually, when they do budget adjustment, they flag things for us to look at. So is that not in the budget adjustment, or was it in the budget, just the budget itself that we passed last year? Because I do know that was in the budget.
It's in the budget, and it isn't something that needs necessarily to be approved here because essentially this is how a lot of federal funding work. It is sort of a process, and so because we knew that these numbers were preliminary when we put them in there was always the possibility that they were going to get less funds. This is just how it worked out after the math. I don't know the specifics of how they determine what the exact numbers are, but there was no real need. This isn't like an adjustment being made to the budget necessarily. This is just making sure the accounting lines up, if that makes sense at all. It's not necessarily a change being made. I don't know.
She just indicated it was in budget adjustment, so maybe she just misspoke.
It will be reflected in sort of the budget adjustment in the sense that like it is a new picture of the budget, and they have the revenue will be in there. Any of the forecasting upgrades will be in there. Let me pull up an operating statement. That'll be
or getting the point to where it is in the budget adjustment.
So it won't be in like the language of the budget adjustment that we looked at. There'll be no like line or like section of it, but it will be in sort of the transportation budget as it exists in the budget as it exists during the budget adjustment. Let me show you. If I could find.
To
Yeah.
Representative Couch while we're.
So just so I didn't understand what we're saying, I think, is there was this expectation that we could get some reimbursement for admin. And that if we looked in the 2025 budget that we passed, it would have been in there somewhere.
It was around, yeah, 18, yeah, because I remember talking about, because I wanted to go after that money, that.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought that there was a mention of 1 year was, because there were two different floods, one was 8 million and one was 6.2 million, but I may have misunderstood
Well,
that.
yeah, 6.2 maybe in this budget.
Maybe that's what's
Next
coming
week.
next week, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe. I mean, I would assume.
Yeah, is there a way you can allow me to share it, or should I join on Zoom? Okay, would you mind sending me a link?
So when I'm on, had success wiggling your connection, which is very sophisticated.
I can join.
What I'm understanding is we probably, or you probably approved the budget that had, we've already spent the money on the labor. And so you approved a budget that spent that money. Then what they found out is they could go back and get reimbursed for that. So what they expected was 8 point something or other, and they got 6 point something or other. So it's not as if, it's like a refund. It's not as if I'm.
Yeah.
I think we're looking to see what do they do with it.
Yeah, I'm just saying, yeah.
It was 6.2 million.
It's gonna go back and just reimburse for money they've already spent.
So the,
They're already.
It's not the same year.
Well, I mean, is it going back to employees in the Department of Agency of Transportation?
No, that's
or
what
the
they-
municipalities,
Yeah,
or-
no, it's this, we pay to state dollars and then we got federal to backfill it, so it frees up that money. And like I said, they did account for it. But my point was was it reflective in the budget adjustment? It sounds like it doesn't have to be. I was just curious of why we didn't see it. Because usually we get flagged everything transportation, but Logan says that's not the case for this one.
so look here. Hide this column, this for now. Hide this one for now. We'll come back to it. So this was the budget as we passed it using the January 2024 revenue, right? So these are the numbers. This was how much we expected to bring in current law revenue. That's our T fund money. This was that revenue, or the refund, sorry, that we were expecting, 8.5. And then you see this sort of total revenue. And then, so 600,000, that was from the increased EV fees that you put in, you might remember if you were here last year. And we kind of get this total revenue number. So then if let's see if I can unhide this, you'll see in this year's, in the BAA, a couple things have changed. We had a revenue upgrade that was in the July forecast. So we're now looking at 317.8 million. But you'll see we had a decrease in the expected refunds. We also see that the agency is estimating to revert about $1.1 million. All of this leads to essentially a slight revenue upgrade, but that is because you're taking the current law revenue increase and subtracting sort of the decrease in the expenditures that we're going to see. And so at the very end of the day, like go all the way down here, you'll see ending balance is $13,000. So this is a lot of just budgetary and accounting things needed to make the budget work, right? This estimated reversions is what the agency is estimating they'll need to revert in order to balance out the budget at the end of the year, given what they know right now as of the BAA sort of thing. So these changes that happen aren't ones that necessarily need to get approved by this body or in the BAA, right? Like the current law revenue is adopted by the e-board and stuff. And so the rest is how the agency goes about balancing and shifting around costs to make everything at the end of the day after all of our appropriations. So you'll see here, appropriations stayed the same. They're not spending any more money. It's just coming from different places.
Sure, obviously it's clear to me, but I guess mine's more of maybe a technical, when you have a reversion, it has to get approval from this body, right?
So
You can't reverse
in most
it.
budgets and the BAA as well, we sort of give them carry forward and reversion approval every year. It's sort of a recurring thing that we give them to allow them to carry forward funds that they want to continue to use for
That's
certain
the
projects,
one.
or revert them
Okay,
in case they need to do things to adjust their budget to make everything balance at the end.
okay.
It's really just allowing the agency to sort of balance a budget at the end of the day.
Representative Powell?
Thanks. Yeah, can you just describe the process of reversion and are there limits and any of that sort of, you know?
Great question. I don't believe so. They do sort of have to, they put forward a list of like what their reversions and carry forwards are going to be. And so that list is available and we can go through that if we want. I don't think there's any limit. There are sort of like rules about like carrying forward funds have to be used for the same project.
Yeah.
Reverted funds sort of end up back in the T fund and are usually used to like balance out the budget. There's some rules on like which projects can be canceled and like stuff like that does need approval. I guess. Yeah, I guess more than that, I guess I'm not sure. I don't think so, but I would have to probably get back to you on like the details of all of that.
So it's fair to say reversions are a little extra that they can put back into their budget, but they can't spend any more than what was approved in the budget. They couldn't take this reversion, add it to an already a budget line for X amount and increase that amount.
Right, so they can't use any more money than was appropriated by this committee and by the budget, right? So they can't spend more, where is it? AOT appropriations. They can't increase this without approval from you all. But they are allowed to sort of delay projects or shift funds if a project comes in under budget or is, you know, sometimes they don't get completed in the timeline expected. They are able to sort of revert those funds and use it to balance out the budget that we have already approved for them, but they can't do more than we have approved for them.
They usually have to tell you what they're reverting from, so that's part.
They do, yeah, and we
Where's this
can,
list of 1.1, where did they get it?
but we can look at that list. I don't know that I actually have it with me right now, but it is a list that the agency has. And if you're wanting to go into details, I think the agency could definitely come in and tell you, you know, what projects got reverted from, what didn't, where the carry forward and reversions are coming from.
But usually we just have that for budget adjustment, usually that just comes to us, you know, to look at. But I'm not blaming anybody, but usually that's up for discussion. I know they have the authority, but we have authority to do to say, yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to bring them and have that discussion, I think.
No, I mean, we're at the 11th hour. I'm just curious that we never saw this list of the 1.1. Like I said, I'm sure it's justified and obviously they have to balance the budget, but I mean, if they're reverting from a project from my town and I don't know about it and I go home and say, oh yeah, you know, that project you got, you know, why'd you vote for that? Well, I look like an idiot. Well, I didn't know. I'm ranting. I know it's not you. I'm just, typically you see a list. Where it came from. So, but that said, you know.
Okay. Anybody else have anything on this particular area? Then I guess I would kind of open it up if there's any other areas that anybody wants to bring up that is potentially for a budget adjustment piece. Now would be a good time to at least start it. And we will adjust the schedule tomorrow to make sure that we can finish it if we can't do it between now and floor. Representative Powell?
Yeah, I mean, the one particular area is the loss of the TV incentive program. And I sort of, you know, one piece that I think we accomplished with that program is the income eligibility piece to it. So the fact that some cars continue to be sold, you know, I could go out and buy one if I needed to, I don't need those incentives, but I think some people do need the incentives. And the fact that they're being spent, those incentives were used, which is good, points that they are being used for people who are sensitive, income sensitive people. So it's an affordability thing, and I'm hoping we can continue to do that in the next budget or some level of that, because I think it's critical, whether it's, to help Vermonters find ways to reduce their spending. And some of these technologies like EVs, I would say the cost per mile is significantly less. And so, I would like us to see if we can, extend that into the next budget, which would be maybe a couple of months, I would guess, with the hope that we continue the program in some form or another, again, with the income sensitivity.
Representative Wolf?
I would just add to that. I mean, I think, looking at the data, it doesn't really argue strongly that the EV incentives are working. I mean, at least it didn't show that when they stopped, that sales stopped, right? So there's not a great short-term story for arguing to continue the EV incentives. But there is more of a long-term story. When we look at 2022 to today, it went from like 4% to 12% of EV ownership in the state. And I think there is a very valid concern about it, like starting a program, having it have some success, stopping the program, starting it again. So all those factors, and recognizing that seems like everything needs money, but everybody's, really feeling like they can't afford anything. So, is there a way to propose maybe funding part of that program so that it can at least continue on a limited basis? Like maybe it doesn't fund as many cars per month being sold, but it still is a program that is out there and dealers can talk about until we get to a new budget where we, try to propose funding in whole. Just kind of a thought to keep it going, but not ask for the full amount of money.
I guess I'll just throw my, if there's anybody, I probably should wait, Vice Chair, but I'll let everybody else talk first.
Well, as somebody who's worked on this program since its inception and seen the growth, it's great that the money was just up. But it's also unfortunately didn't get the grant. Given that, I think if we can put a little bit of money into budget adjustment, because people like to buy cars in the spring. Our budget doesn't start till July 1st. We could wait until the full budget and get the money in, figure out where there can be money that will keep the program going year round. That'll be a challenge, but we can figure that out in time or not. But meanwhile, I would say we don't want to give to budget adjustment and then not have the money in the governor's budget. We're sort of suspecting that maybe it is in the governor's budget. So it would give people a jump start on that program. If it's been finished since October, if we can, by the time the budget adjustment passes, this might be able to be started up again in May. So we give 2 months for people to use it, and then hopefully it could just smoothly carry through. So I would be in favor of some money going into budget adjustment for this very valuable program.
Does anybody else have any pieces? Do we have start with Representative McCoy down here?
So, at some point, this was a rebate to kickstart electric vehicles. And at some point, we need to realize that we're not going to have incentives anymore because, they're kind of self-funding themselves, which I think we pretty much saw in the slides. They didn't decrease, they're at 14%. So is this year to do it? I don't know. Does the governor have money in his budget to fund this program again? I don't know. But we keep,
putting money towards it, but people are buying them anyway, regardless of whether there is that incentive there or not. And I am adamantly opposed to using any transportation money for this to fund electric vehicles, because we don't have any money anyway in transportation. We have to start looking at ways to actually fund transportation. Additionally, if you're using general fund money, we need to realize that I think the majority of whatever money we have left over in the general fund is going to go to education to lower property taxes for this year. Because right now we're looking at a 6% increase in property taxes this year, on top of the 14% last year, on top of the 8% the previous year. So, a 30% increase over 3 years for, Vermonters is just too much for people to afford. So my personal preference would be any general fund money that we have left over, throw it into education this year rather than, $1 million to an EV program, or, because the figures look like they're 14% anyway in December, November, December. So that's my take. I don't want to use any T money for this at all.
Representative. Either hands, I think you had a hand and go ahead.
Just to repeat, I agree with Candace. There was no difference in the sales there. And Matt Kohler said if it started up and then stopped, it's a waste of time. So I would be against it too.
Representative Burke?
Speak again?
It was, maybe who's going to go first? Go ahead. Representative.
Well, I think first of all, Phil's point about the fact that it's, it's an affordability issue for low-income people and transportation is the biggest burden for as we know, for low-income people. Low-income people bear the greatest transportation burden. And I think I would only be in favor of this I wish we knew what was in the governor's budget, because it's true, we don't want to start a program up and stop it. But if we knew it's in the governor's budget, or if we suspected it, then, we could make it contingent upon that so that it would give a little jump start to the program. So that would just be my preference.
Did you want to go, Representative Keiser?
So what I hear the table saying is that I agree with Patty that we wouldn't want to use transportation funds. So I'm hearing that we'd ask for it in the general fund, but then also that we would, if there was any money in the governor's budget for such things, then we would go along with something that would go in to help with affordability and such things like that. So 2 parameters, general fund, and that it must be in the governor's budget ongoing, as far as the 2 conditions in the letter.
Representative Casey.
I was hoping that, Matt seemed to be pretty informative, Matt Coda, and I was hoping that we bring him back in again. I don't know, it's just I hear some things getting thrown around and he kind of has some facts. Well, like one of them, and it's just an opinion, but I don't necessarily believe that it's really cheaper to run an electric vehicle than a high efficiency gas vehicle. I just don't believe it. And low income people, they got a lot of infrastructure they got to put in. They may be lucky and have a 200 amp service, but a lot of places only have 100 amps. So that low income person also has to incur the expenses of putting in a charging system. And if they can't really afford much, they're gonna have a slow charger. So they're gonna have to drive their gas car for a few days, especially during the winter. It's probably expensive to put in a fast charger. And I don't even know if it's compatible with 200 amp service. You might have to have more. You might have to put a special box in for that. I don't know.
You don't know.
Yeah, I don't. And that's where Matt might be handy to explain some of this stuff.
Well, digging into the EVs itself and how it works is something we perhaps will do as we go further along. Right now, we are points well taken, that we're talking about whether we are or aren't going to ask, yes, whether we are or aren't going to ask for electric vehicle incentives. And I think that the portion about the timing, when we don't know what's in the governor's budget, we don't know if he's intending to continue it. We don't, and we are recognizing the start and the stop, puts us in a tough situation, you know, and so, but as far as that piece, he's not the only, we've heard plenty in previously, and we can hear more about EV pieces, but I'm not really trying to say other than, I thought you were headed in the other direction on the other party brought up about the manufacturers. That's another subject that isn't for this. So I apologize on that part. I believe if you're all set, I'm not sure.
I'm all set, yeah, I'm fine.
Then I think Representative Thomas had her hand up next.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that in Matt Coda's presentation, I noted that the trends weren't disaggregated by household income. So I'm afraid we don't have the full picture of trends in order to inform this. You know, there's a lot more to dig into in terms of EVs and trends and usage of that incentive. And also, I just wanted to bring up, I mean, there's notes, obviously our budget is very strained. My understanding at the same time is that the T fund has more than $4 million surplus. So I just wanted to put that out there as well while we're having this conversation. I don't know that it's a foregone conclusion that it has to come from the general fund.
My comment to that is that's where this program currently is funded out of.
Okay.
Okay, that does not mean that it can't, there are other ways to fund things, but the current program as stood up, correct me, Logan, it is a general fund money right now. It has been.
Majority of it, yes, a large funding came from the general fund already.
But we also have to recognize for the climate goals is 35%. So 14 is a long ways. 14 is a long ways from 35. We're not quite, I don't know if I agreed or not agree with however the comments were about whether that spinning wheel is not enough yet to continue to go and to get towards 35%. I know you were looking for the floor, so I'll pass it over here.
No, I guess I'll say I'm more than comfortable recommending to the appropriations committee, $2 million. Matt, I guess you interpreted what he said. I think he was pretty clear that incentives do have an impact. He wasn't saying that they don't have any impact. He was saying, yeah, they do have an impact, but sometimes it's a little bit hard to quantify because of the dealerships, incentives and programs that they have. Just being on this committee and the amount of money that we put in incentives, I think it has a huge impact. It's been well utilized. The burn rate was higher than anticipated. If it didn't have an impact, we would still have money in this fund. They thought this money was going to last us, another 6 months or so. And it hasn't. So, that's a telltale sign for me. This is a successful program. I think it's an important enough program to make a recommendation to be part of the conversation. Like you said, we're giving a letter to the appropriations committee, and they're gonna take the whole picture. All the different 13, 14, how many committees we have. And they're gonna look at their recommendations, and I think we should have a seat at that table to say, hey, this is important to us, it's important to Vermonters, it's important to low-income people. And they're gonna have the ultimate decision, but for us to say, no, we don't even want to be part of that conversation, I think we're missing out. And so I know that Patty just left, so we can't have a vote without her, but I'm gonna make a recommendation at some point to make, in our letter, to recommend $2 million. For the appropriations consideration.
Sorry, just wasn't, and that number wise, I guess I didn't understand, Logan, from the program had gotten up to about 500,000 or 600,000 a month. At the end is what the burn rate, I think that Patrick had indicated. So if we can only do 2 months at the end of the budget, so I don't know or 3 months, 1.8, that's pretty close to 2 or 2 million. So I could see a number right in that ballpark of it was up to, they'd gotten the burn rate up to about between 500,000 and 600,000 a month.
Based on his numbers here for the electric vehicles, mileage smart, and replace your ride at quick calculation, 2.8 per quarter. So 2.8 million per quarter. So, like you said,
In that ballpark.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So
Just mention, you can also,
we,
if you want to give them money, you can also tell them to make it last until July 1. And they will disperse of however much money over the months.
And as it plays out, I guess we'll find out in the meantime of where the governor's recommend is at. I don't want to make, I'm going to get in trouble for making you late for floor. So I guess Damian or Logan, I guess would, we'll still, it seems like we're split on it to a certain degree. So at least we need some level of a language, a few sentences to ask what we're potentially asking so that we can then straw vote it on it tomorrow.
Yes.
Is there any other, sorry, go ahead.
The question is general fund or T fund?
I feel pretty strongly that it's got to come from where the money's coming from now, but that's my opinion. I'm not, I probably shouldn't
You
jump
can
in
leave it
there.
up to the.
You can leave it up to appropriations, but I'm certainly understanding from at least part of the committee that they would feel pretty strongly to try to keep that in the letter. I guess we'll have to discuss it more tomorrow, but do you have enough to start on something that, I don't think this is a long draft or anything.
No, I think it'll be, yeah, it's probably 2 sentences.
Okay.
I said more than 2 sentences there.
Okay. We're gonna have to, do
Yeah, I mean,
you have enough to
can
move on?
Summarize what all of you said in a couple of sentences. We recommend X amount. We recommend they come from Y source. And then I can change those blanks.
Okay, and we need to adjourn so that people can get to the floor.